This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Despite what you have just been told, I am not, in fact, Dr. Fred Moss, although he is here with me, and I will be introducing him to you momentarily. So who am I? Who is this voice that is bleeding into your earbuds right now? My name is Ryan Levesque, and I am a veteran podcaster myself and the producer of this podcast, along with my friend and colleague, Dr. Fred Moss. So who is Dr. Fred? What is the Welcome to Humanity podcast? To answer those questions, I would like to formally introduce Dr. Fred to you now. So welcome, Dr. Fred, to your own podcast.
It's really a pleasure to be on my own podcast as a guest. Thank you so much, Ryan.
It is awesome to have you here. And Dr. Fred, we've been working on this for a few months now. We've been talking about it for a lot longer than that as a possibility. Yeah. And we have put together just an incredible set of interviews to launch this show. And before we talk about that at all, why don't we just kind of get out of the way what our listeners will hear will be one of the first orders of business, letting the audience get to hear a little bit from the guest and hear who they are. So would you do us the honors of introducing yourself to the audience? Who is Dr. Fred?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. So, my name is Dr. Fred Moss. Fred Moss is how that's who I was started off as. And I've been in this mental health field for a bit over 40 years, started with the field in January of 1980. And I was so committed, even as I look back to then, to connecting with others and communicating with others as a source of healing. I had dropped out of college because it wasn't happening there. And my mother got me a job in mental health. And I just began there as a child care worker and was really where I learned that communication and connection is so sourceful in any healing mechanism. So what happened was after a few years, I really saw that I thought I could be a even better doctor than I watched the doctors be with the kids I was taking care of. And so off back to medical school I went. And then before too long, I created a career as a psychiatrist in every single arena of psychiatry that I could find. I got a little taste of, and interviewing people and being with people and really getting the best out of people and learning from others who they were, and like being someone who can inspire people at times. But it maybe more than anything else, Ryan, what I like to think I do is really get down to the source of who other people are. And that's who the source of I am is getting down to the source of who other people are. So the idea of a podcast, has always been really interesting for me to interview interesting people around the world. And in this case, to not only interview them for myself and them, but to be able to broadcast it to all interested parties is something that's been fascinating, interesting, and it's just glorious to be at this point in my life to be able to deliver that kind of work into the airwaves.
And deliver it in spades you do, Dr. Fred. I thought maybe to frame the conversation of what is the Welcome to Humanity podcast, perhaps we could talk a little bit about what makes this show different than all of the other hundreds and thousands of podcasts out there. Mm-hmm. And we came up a list of about 3 things that distinguish the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And the first, of course, is the host, you. There are lots of interview shows out there, but there's only one interview show with Dr. Fred as the host. And of course, part of that is the distinction of you being a psychiatrist with, as you said, a long career in the mental health field. But I think there's some other, beyond just your actual professional training, some other skills that you bring to each conversation. And maybe you could say a word about that, Dr. Fred.
First of all, I don't know where I'm unique entirely, because I've actually been with me the entire run of my life so far. So I don't really see what part of me stands out when compared to others, as well as maybe you do. But one thing is really clear is I've been just so curious about people for so long. There's just always been something about really getting to one's truth and getting to one's goodness and, getting to the bottom of what people are, like taking them with me to the bottom of who they are. And it actually dictated my interest in going into the mental health field. It's who I was when I was in high school. It's who I was for my girlfriends and my boyfriends. They would call me and we would take them in conversations to where they thought the interest lied, or where they thought the issue was, or where they thought the problem was, or where they thought the dream was. And I feel like I've been sort of naturally put on this planet to be that kind of person. So you're right. It's not psychiatry that dictates who I was or who I am. It's quite the opposite. Who I am then dictated me to go into the mental health sharing field. And in the meantime, I found myself being a vagabond in much of my life, in the last 10 years anyways, being all over the world. I've been in Europe and been in Israel, and I've been I think in every state in the country. I'm pretty sure that I've been in every continental state in the country, at least for a short while. And I've lived in multiple different places. And it's really been great to be able to continue to be a psychiatrist while I was traveling. And for the last 10 years, of course, most of that has been through the world of telepsychiatry or virtual psychiatry, online psychiatry. Interviewing people online and interviewing people on the telephone is nothing new to me. It's actually something that's where I'm in my home base, where I feel most free and easy, like we're doing today. And maybe that comes out in the capacity of who I get to be when I'm interviewing my terrific guests. I'm sure looking forward to all the people that we're going to interview in the Welcome to Humanity podcast.
I think that ability to interview people, or that experience of interviewing people, you've learned to kind of get to the heart of the matter with people and quickly get past the surface and into some of the deeper issues or concerns or realities. And that really leads to our second point, which is about the format of this podcast. Now, when we first sat down and started planning out what the show was going to look like, we were pretty clear on the fact that if we did a short show format, say with 10 to 15 minute episodes, maybe 20 minutes at the most, we might get more downloads and listens, and that could position us to climb the charts a bit more quickly. But we decided to choose a format that really served the interests of what we're all about, of what Welcome to Humanity is all about. So do you want to say a little bit about the format of the show and what the long form format allows for here?
Sure. Thank you for pointing that out as well. I think I'm going to circle back a little bit to the end of the last question. I think what we have here is, in the Welcome to Humanity brand, it's really, we worked hard to come up with that name. And what are we really doing? And one of the things we're doing is we're really getting that, each and every human is spectacular. Each and every human in and of themselves, and I mean each and every one, is fully spectacular, fully creative, fully available in some ways to communicate with, and has something to offer to the planet. And I really mean that to my core, And so I worked in homeless shelters, and I've worked in very well-to-do neighborhoods. I've worked with the worried well. I've worked in prisons, and I've worked in homeless shelters, like I said, or worked in orphanages and methadone clinics and residential homes, inpatient units and outpatient units and nursing homes and mobile crisis teams, and even done my share of house calls. And each and every one of those sort of brings forth something like really getting the person that's in front of me is a real person, not only a real person, but one who needs to be respected at the very highest level for being the person that they have become and the person who they are when I meet them. And I've been so fascinated with that there is nobody who's like more interesting or more important than any other person inherently. I mean, we draw conversations together. We create a prevailing conversation that puts maybe some people more interesting or more iconic or more famous or more maybe worth listening to or something. But in reality, I don't have it that way. I have it that with another person, one can dig to the gold and get there very, very quickly, as long as one appreciates that it's there to be gotten. And I treat each and every person, or I like to think that I treat each and every person to that effect. And I think that's what comes forth in the interviews. Maybe that's something that I'm fairly uniquely qualified for. Having hung out around in the streets or in the prisons, or I'm a doctor, I'm an MD, I'm a Northwestern graduate. And so I've even, hung around with the well-to-do and hung around with, those who are at least materialistically comfortable. And I feel just as comfortable in the streets as I do in, a mansion or in a country club. And I think that comes through in my interviewing style. So when we go to the format question, I think what I would have to say to that is, within 10 minutes, at least that's been our case so far with the 20 or so that we've done, we're into the gold already. We're into some really, really fresh material quite quickly. And then given that my guest tends to be very comfortable exploring their own selves in my presence, because that is what we're doing, is highlighting the guests, the miracle of the guests that we have on our show, then I sort of hold the hand of my guest as they walk me through what it means to be them. And there's nothing more fun for me. There's truly nothing more interesting in the world. The whole world stops when I start doing these podcasts, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Fred, that realizing as we're talking about this, we've sort of, with my guidance, buried the lead here in terms of what the show's really about. And we've mentioned this title of the Welcome to Humanity podcast several times now, but we've kind of just left that out there without much context or explanation, although you've certainly just hinted at it, or maybe even more than hinted at it. Let's talk about the content. We've got lots of different types of guests, and I'll ask you in a moment maybe to share a few words about some of the guests that stand out for you. But for now, what does it mean to look at the world or look at our guests through the prism of Welcome to Humanity? What is Welcome to Humanity all about?
Right.
What are we trying to do here?
We went back and forth, as you know, with the name of this podcast. And there are two brands that we juggle together. And the overarching umbrella brand is the Welcome to Humanity brand. We started off considering that the brand for this podcast should be Global Madness. And,
right.
The Global Madness it's a great catchy name. And it really is sort of the days that we're living in, and maybe the days that humanity's been in since the beginning of time, actually, this idea of global madness. And then, we had this lockdown, and the lockdown happened right as we were starting, where, we had done just a handful of interviews, and then the lockdown happened, and it seemed like global madness became really the normal reality of our life. And so we upgraded the name to Welcome to Humanity again, which is more sourceful for what we're up to here. We really get a look at these interviews of some of the most amazing people I've ever met. And I really think that every single person you bring on, or that we bring on to this podcast, is going to be an amazing person that we haven't met yet, because that's how the podcast is delivered. What I'm suggesting here is maybe that person or other people don't yet know that this is one of the most amazing people that you've ever met. And in the interviewing style, or in the interchange, in the interactive way that the podcast is intended to be developed, what we've learned quite quickly is the person who's on the other side of this podcast is an extraordinary human being. And that's what I like to bring forth. And that's where we really get to say to each other something like, wow, that person is extraordinary. That person is up to this and up to that. And I think it also brings the possibility for the listener to seeing how extraordinary they are as a listener, and what they're really up to in their life, in their miracle of their own humanity.
So, Dr. Fred, I want to ask you this question, and I realize I'm wading into a little bit of treacherous territory here. We're going to be launching with 12 episodes, and I want to ask you to share maybe just a few examples of some of the episodes that stand out to you. And I know that's a dangerous request, because obviously all 12 of them are really, really great, and we don't want to leave anyone out. On the other hand, we only have so much time here just to give listeners a taste. So if you will, chosen either by those that appeal to you the most strongly or just at random, what pops up in your mind, can you share a few things that get covered or some of the people that we meet in the first 12 episodes?
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to say is you're right. We've actually done 18 episodes. And so by the time even this is being aired, we'll probably be up closer to 25 or 30 episodes completed. And so these are the 12 people that got chosen because they were easy to edit and they were the ones who were here to be had. So let's make that really notable. There's Sarah Safari. So Sarah is the one who opens us up, and she was the first interview we did. And, Sarah is an excellent, just a terrific example of what it is to be an amazing human being and be sort of unassuming and so much like any of us, and on first glance, Sarah Safari is just a person, just a person with a gorgeous smile and a person with a brilliant curiosity and soft-spoken and, somehow probably making it through the world one way or another. And then we start learning about the magic that she is. We start learning about who she is in the world and all the many things that she stands for and some of the most amazing things she's already done with her life. For instance, climbing all the peaks, all the top peaks in all 7 continents. And the only one left for her to climb is actually the one that was the first one she tried to climb. And she was involved in an extraordinary avalanche up Mount Everest. There's not that many people who get to say that they were like lost in an avalanche for a week in Mount Everest, and there she was. And you start really realizing that was what launched her career. That didn't stop her. That's actually what launched her. And we start seeing, I know for me, I start seeing parts of myself where I've just been so determined to get stuff done that I'd be knocked to the mat or discouraged, or maybe not an avalanche in Everest, but something would happen where I would think, oh, maybe I need to stop. And then I would find myself even going with greater guns. So I was really able to see myself in the interview with Sarah. That would be one really prime example of an excellent guest interview that we had.
Yeah, and of course, Sarah does lead off our series of the first 12 as the very first, as you said, Dr. Fred, not only the very first interview that we conducted for this podcast, but also the one that's leading us off here as we roll out the podcast. Did you want to say a word about another interview or two?
Sure. I have gotten a little bit closer with a bunch of people who are up to some major things in the world regarding the transformation of the narrative of mental health on a global scale. One of those people is the writer for Mad in America, the creator of Mad in America, also well known for a book that he wrote called The Anatomy of an Epidemic. So Robert Whitaker joined us, and what an amazing person he is too, just taking a stand for really looking clearly and plainly down the barrel of this industry called mental illness and mental health over the last 50 or 80 years. And, we've been friends for a couple years now as he's become sort of a fan of what I'm up to with respect to global madness and Welcome to Humanity. And it was just so beautiful to have the calm and courageous conversation with him as a colleague, really walking through some of the things that we either know or think we know or don't know about mental illness and the different directions that whole conversation might take in the near future to the betterment of all of mankind. So really, that was also a super, super rewarding conversation.
For sure.
Yeah, it really was. And then most recently, another writer, Lawrence Gonzalez. Yeah, he's the writer of Deep Survival, and that I just completed that book. And sure enough, right upon completing the book, here was the writer, and I got to speak to the writer of the book that I had just completed. I'd never really have done that before, but there was a real opportunity to get to the heart of the matter of this man who explains why survivors survive. I guess that's an interesting crossover to Sarah. How is it that she survived that? What kind of skills or what kind of attributes or what kind of luck or what kind of aspects of humanity have one face the traumas of a natural disaster or an accident and actually live through it and thrive? And those are some of the things that Lawrence Gonzalez addressed in his book, and then so openly and beautifully in the conversation we had just last week. Now, I don't think he's in the original 12. Or is he in the original?
He is, yeah. Yep,
Okay,
he's in the first 12.
Good. And then, there was others. My good friend, Michael Gelb, just a wildly hilarious, extraordinary human being who's up to so many things. And then from those so many things gets up to even more things. So it's really, really fun to interview friends. It seems like all these people are my friends, or they become my friends permanently upon interviewing in this podcast broadcast. So Michael's a super fun interview. I think people will find a whole lot of themselves. Again, you can separate yourself from some of these people and think that you're not like them. But as you listen closely to them, you could discover something for yourself right through your listening of them, because what you get is that we are all human. We are one group of entities called humanity. And when we get if you can get the spectacular nature of other people, it's because it's in you, the listener, as well. And that may be one of the things that we're really targeting in the creation of the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I think, Ryan.
I love that, Dr. Fred. And I think that really is the opportunity here. You could look across the list of guests on the various episodes, and there's, in some cases, a pretty wide diversity among different careers and interests. And there may be some on there that you think like, oh, geez, for example, to go back to Sarah Safari again, well, I'm never going to climb Mount Everest. So what's the point in listening to that one? But besides just the wild tale that she shares and the incredible journey, it's like there's that saying, success leaves clues. And throughout each of these interviews, we're getting clues and perspectives and approaches and tools for living as humans on this third rock from the sun, and not just living, but flourishing and living extraordinary lives.
Indeed. And when I look at the list of the 12 people, and it is in front of me, that list, the 12 people who represent the episodes that'll be released on May 20th, each and every one of them is just a fascinating human being. And of course, it even includes, and maybe especially includes, your lovely daughter, who I just got to interview just a few weeks ago, and who was able to join us for our Passover Seder amazingly online. But really, Isabella is such an extraordinary, I know that our listeners will just appreciate the wonderment and miracle of this. How old is she? She's
going to be 11 by the time this podcast drops.
That's right. So, of this 10, she initially, I think, said she was 10 and a half, and we corrected her to get her close to 11.
Right.
So she's just an amazing human being, and just so touching and inspiring in so many different ways. And I get to see my child, like who I am as a child, every time I interview. I'm so lucky to have occasional contact with Isabella. And, everyone from Spring Chang, who's a world figure and managing what humanity is all about and just giving it a vocabulary that is useful for anyone. And Dennis Sandow, who's had his whole life transformed, the ways that he also takes on humanity. Paul Dolman, a well-known podcast host in his own right, who just had a blast with me, and both I had been a guest on his show, and it was so great to return his favor and then get the wonder who he is as a human being, and so many others. So I thank you for helping me arrange these guests and for being there as a co-director, because it's honestly one of the, if not the most fun thing I've ever done, is interviewing these people, and in a way that I know that other people will be able to appreciate and listen to them.
I think the enthusiasm that we both share for getting this work out to the world, sharing these conversations, is pretty apparent. And I often think of myself as just bursting at the seams every time I listen to a new interview. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, can we get this out today? But of course, we want to do this right and do it on a sustainable and regular schedule. And so, as Dr. Fred said, our drop date of the first 12 is going to be on May 20th of 2020. And then we'll be releasing a little bit more in some, I'll call it bulk, for a short period of time, but then quickly going to Welcome to Humanity Wednesdays, meaning every Wednesday we'll be dropping a new episode. Mm-hmm. So definitely go ahead and get subscribed now on iTunes. You don't have much to leave a review on based on this interview, but if you feel so inspired, please leave us a review as well, or let us know what you're looking forward to and anticipating with this show. And we also want to invite our listeners to go to welcometohumanity.net/podcast and click on the first post there and sign up to get notified when the first episodes drop. So again, circle it on your calendar, write it on the back of your hand, spray paint it on your bedroom wall. May 20th, 2020 is the drop date for the first 12 episodes of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And Dr. Fred, as we wind up here, anything else you want to share with our listeners before we call this a day and anticipate our first official release?
Yeah, I know he's going to be surprised when he hears this, but I'd like to acknowledge Bo Bennett. Bo and I are the ones actually who met before you and I did. And so, I called Bo for services back in 2006, and you were his right-hand man in the case, and that's how our friendship started. So I want to acknowledge him first for introducing you to me, and then all the fun work that we've had in the last 15 years. It's just extraordinary. And I also want to acknowledge Bo Bennett because he's also the first person who ever introduced the whole notion of podcast to me. In the podcast back then, I think in 2008, maybe I was in a podcast in Bo's basement with you. Those are some good times where I really just got a start of whatever this whole service was. And on top of that, isn't it great that I actually got to interview Bo Bennett as part of this Front 12? And what a completely brilliant soul that man is. His contribution to society and his willingness and his courage to look at how things go in the world comes out in that interview in so many different colors. And so I can't wait to release that particular interview. And again, deep thanks to Bo Bennett for introducing us and for introducing me to podcasts, and then for being one of the charter guests on the first 12. So thanks. And I think that's it for now.
All right. It's so funny. Everyone that you talk about, Dr. Fred, I'm like, no, that one's my favorite. No, that one's my favorite. Because really a case can be made for each. They're all so wonderful.
Thank you.
So thanks, folks, for tuning in. Please, again, subscribe at iTunes. Leave us an anticipatory review, if you will. And be sure to check back on May 20th of 2020 for the first 12 episodes of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thank you, Dr. Fred. I'll also just say, if you're like, that Ryan Levesque guy, I don't really like him, you're not going to be hearing much from me. You'll be hearing from Dr. Fred, and I can assure you, you are in the best of hands with the good doctor. So thanks, Dr. Fred.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ryan. And although you're not being heard, let's be real honest here. So much of what you say is coming through with who I get to be in this world and who I get to be as a doctor, as a man, as a friend, as a podcast host, and as a member of the group of humanity. So you're a key player in my life, and it's really wonderful to have you here, Ryan. So thank you for that, and thank you for this introduction, and we'll see you on the flip side.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Fred. Take care.
Bye.